Now what? I did a first video. I think that turned out pretty well. I was a little nervous during it, but you know what? Overall, I think it was all right. But what's this next video going to be? What am I going to talk about here? Like, I don't know. It's almost Halloween, I guess. Is there something in that? Shit. Sorry. One second, I guess. I should take this. Hello?
What's your favorite scary movie?
That's it. That's it. We are going to do a deep dive into... Scream is my all-time favorite horror movie, and it has been pretty much since I saw it when I was in my early teens somewhere, out at camp with my family. We used to always go to this cabin, well, various cabins, and stop at Blockbuster on the way, get a bunch of movies for like the rainy days when we can't be outside doing stuff. It's always stuck with me. I love this movie, I love this franchise, and I cannot wait for the next one coming out in, I think it's January 2022. For anyone who hasn't seen this movie yet, just a warning for you, I'm obviously going to be going full spoilers in here, and it's kind of more of a murder mystery than a horror in some respects. So if you want to go in not knowing who Ghostface is, this is your one and only chance before I start spoiling everything. A lot of people are coming up with fan theories, and there are rumors going around with the new Scream as to whether or not Sidney might become Ghostface in this one. And this is extra interesting to me upon having just rewatched the original, because she already did that. This one scene, just like with the Small Soldiers video, where there's just a couple lines in there that got me so interested that I had to go deeper into it. The climax of this movie got me so invested into one aspect that I needed to talk about it. I needed to go in depth as to what is going on here, because Sidney becomes Ghostface to survive against Stu and Billy. Basically, we get to the end and they've explained their whole plan. They're getting ready to kill her. They are framing her father for all these murders that have happened, but she gets away. But instead of just sneaking off, instead of hiding scared somewhere, being quiet until the police arrive, she calls them. She calls them and uses the voice modulator that they've been using this whole time to be Ghostface, and she asks them to play a game. It's the exact same kind of setup as Ghostface has been doing this whole time, and even better than that, when Billy comes after her, she jumps out of the closet wearing the Ghostface costume and stabs him with an umbrella instead of a knife. But still, Sidney full-on becomes Ghostface, and honestly, I want to talk about why. But let's be real, we can't talk about the end without first starting at the beginning. So, what's really going on in Scream? Scream was released in 1996, directed by Wes Craven and written by Kevin Williamson. The movie kicks off with what could basically just be a horror short film all on its own. We get Casey, a teenage girl who's home all alone and getting wrong number calls from somebody. After this unknown caller calls back a couple times, the two start flirting. Casey's just gonna have a nice night in watching some scary movies. And this is where we first get the iconic line,
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
The flirting goes on a little longer, and the voice on the other end ends up asking for Casey's name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
Casey is obviously freaked out and starts talking about her boyfriend, claiming that she lied when she said she didn't have one. Well, turns out Ghostface, the one on the other end, already knew this and has Steve tied up on her patio. If Casey ever wants to see Steve alive again, she's gonna have to play a little game, a game of horror trivia. While Casey gets the first question right, she kinda fumbles on the second, and Ghostface gets into the house, chasing down Casey, and at this point we're getting a really cool use of diegetic special effects right here. Casey was making popcorn this whole time, and with everything going on with Ghostface, she's forgotten about it. The whole place is starting to fill with smoke because of the fact that the popcorn's burning, and it's giving so much more atmosphere to this scene for a legitimate in-universe reason, which is just so cool. Casey hides until she hears a car coming down the road and runs to try to get help. Ghostface catches her and starts to stab her to death, but not before she pulls off their mask and sees who it is. We don't see it, but it sets up this mystery, this anticipation for who is going to be the killer. Her parents get inside the house, finding it filled with smoke. There's a fire in the kitchen, and the whole place looks destroyed from the fight Casey and Ghostface had. And her mother picks up the phone to hear the dying breaths of Casey. At this point, Casey's father tells her mom to go to the neighbor to call the police, but when Casey's mother steps outside, she sees the dead body of her daughter hanging by their tree, guts spilling out. At this point, we go to Sidney and start setting up everyone in her life as possible suspects for who Ghostface could be. There's Billy, her boyfriend, who's clearly having some issues with the fact that they're not having sex.
You see what you do to me?
And then we get her dad, who's going out of town for the weekend. Going forward a little more, she ends up going to school the next day, and there's reporters and the police all over the place. She ends up talking to her best friend, asking what's going on, and Tatum tells her that
Casey Becker and Steve Orris were killed last night.
this is hitting Sidney extra hard because somebody close to her has died recently. We start getting hints at this, but it's not until a little later we learn that her mother, Sidney Prescott, was raped and murdered by a man named Cotton Weary, who's currently on death row. Anyway, throughout the day, we end up being introduced to everybody who's going to go on to be a suspect. We get Deputy Dewey, Tatum's brother. We get the principal, who's not such a suspect, but he's definitely at least a little creepy, like the way he touches her when she's in his office. We get Tatum's boyfriend, Stu, and we get the final member of the friend group, Randy, who goes a little far in his love of movies. After school, when Sidney's at home, she ends up being the next person attacked by Ghostface. Not only that, Ghostface makes the claim that he's responsible for Maureen's death. At the end of this attack, Sidney's hiding in her room, and Billy comes in through her window, just like he did in the beginning. But this time, he drops a cell phone, and there's nothing more suspicious than a guy with a cell phone. Again, we're talking about movies from the 90s, and this is always hilarious. So Billy is taken into custody, but this doesn't last very long because, as it turns out, Sidney's going to get another call from Ghostface just later that night, and not only does that seem to prove that he's innocent, but the police also check the phone records on the cell phone and discover that he didn't make the calls to Casey or Sidney. The next day at school, people are going crazy, losing their minds over this whole idea of Ghostface. We even have a couple kids who are running down the halls dressed as Ghostface, just trying to stir up trouble and get expelled for it. Then we get Ghostface attacking Sidney for a second time here at the school. This leads to the principal deciding to suspend school for the time being until things calm down. And not only this, but informs everyone over the loudspeaker that there's going to be a curfew put on the entire town beginning at 9 p.m. tonight. Now, the kids still aren't taking this seriously, except for Sidney. So, you know what? What better thing to do than throw a big party? So Stu's going to throw a big party at his place, and Tatum tries to convince Sidney that this is probably the best option anyway, because if she's surrounded by people, she's got to be safe, right? So the movie gets into this really creepy kind of montage of a whole town closing up because of this curfew going on, and even Sidney and Tatum out getting snacks for the party, only for us to end up seeing Ghostface in a reflection inside of the store. But then we get my favorite scene in this movie that will not fit into anything else I'm going to talk about, so I have to talk about it here. Dewey has told Sidney and Tatum that he has some business to attend to, so he has to abandon them to get their snacks by themselves. But his business was apparently to get some ice cream. Dewey's holding an ice cream cone as he goes to talk to the sheriff, who is smoking a cigarette. What makes this amazing is it's all played up as though Dewey is trying to impress the sheriff by mimicking him. Only every time the sheriff takes a drag, Dewey doesn't have a cigarette. He has an ice cream cone, and he has to take a lick. And I had to watch this movie a few times in order to get ready to make this video, and every time I got to this scene, it got funnier and funnier for me. Just the idea of the sheriff taking a drag and Dewey licking his ice cream cone. And even when it gets to the end of the scene and the sheriff puts out the butt, we don't see the ice cream cone anymore. And honestly, there's enough of a hint of a sound effect that it sounds like Dewey dropped the ice cream cone. I am convinced that that's what happened, and there's nothing in the movie that could tell me otherwise. And this scene is just made even better when Dewey is later complaining that no one takes him seriously.
It's just this town's way of not taking me serious.
So anyway, we get to the final party, and this is like nearly half the movie in one gigantic scene. All of our key characters end up here at this party, so someone here is the killer. And we know this 100% when Tatum's murdered in the garage. And then we get the iconic rules to horror movies and how to survive them, and learn that I would not. Basically, everyone either dies dies or appears to die only to come back later to maybe die again, until finally we get to the reveal that Stu and Billy have been Ghostface all along. And not only have they been Ghostface, but they were responsible for Maureen's death as well, and framed Caught Him Weary. When Gale comes back after being thought dead and holds a gun on them just long enough to distract them, Sidney gets away and hides in a closet, and this is where we get to the real point of this, where Sidney, in essence, becomes Ghostface to survive this movie. At the end of the movie, the only survivors are Sidney, Gale, Randy, and Dewey, even though almost all of them look like they died at some point. And Gale ends the movie finally doing her news report on all the events that happen, comparing them to the events of a scary movie. And here's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of this. This idea that the world within this movie is like a movie, which sounds like a redundant kind of sentence here. Obviously, it's like a movie because we're watching it. But you know what? Let's get into this. The phrase life is like a movie sounds weird to say about a movie because obviously all the lives in that movie are literally like a movie for us as the audience, but it's interesting the ways in which Scream makes this point in the movie itself. It is a movie mostly about genre conventions and how the people in this movie fit into them. In the Small Soldiers video, I talked about concepts of intertextuality and paratextuality, and in this I'm going to touch slightly on the concept of architectuality because that is where Scream gets a lot of what it does. Architectuality is basically the connection movies and media share through genre, and that is what Scream works in, the genre of horror movies, or just scary movies, as it says nearly every time. I think the phrase horror movie is only said once in the entire movie. More so than anywhere else, we could see this concept of how Scream is using the conventions of horror movies through the character of Randy. Now, I've already talked about the fact that Randy brings up the rules of how to survive a horror movie, but this isn't the only time he's bringing up these kinds of things. If we rewind to his very first scene, it's about the group of friends hanging out around a fountain talking about what happened to Casey and Steve. Randy the whole time is comparing things to horror movies, Stu making similar kinds of comments, and this goes into a place of who could be the killer. When Tatum brings up the idea that a woman could have done it,
that is so sexist. The killer could easily be female. Basic instinct.
It's not about a real life serial killer, it's about a movie where a woman is the killer. Later on in the movie, Randy's at work in a video store talking once again about movies and how Billy is definitely the killer because that's what movies tell you has to be the case. He starts talking about how the police have it all wrong. If they watch more movies, they would know these things.
See, the police are always off track with this shit. If they watch Prom Night, they'd save time. There's a formula to it. A very simple formula.
The fact that Randy is right really just goes to show how much this movie is saying, yes, genre conventions from movies are how this movie is being done. Life in the world of Scream is like a movie. And touching on this scene just a second longer, the fact that it turns out Billy and Stu are the killers make this scene so much more terrifying when Randy is surrounded by the two of them, just squeezed into such a tight shot. This movie holds up to repeat viewing so well. But alright, we have Randy explaining to everybody that life is like a movie, but what does that actually mean for this? Well, let's get to our main character, Sidney. Sidney's whole thing is she doesn't feel control over her own life, and she really, for the most part in this movie, actually does not have control. When the conversation keeps turning to if life were a movie, we get questions like asking Sidney who would play her in a movie, to which she responds with,
I shudder to think.
I see you as a young Meg Ryan myself.
Thanks, Dewey, with my luck they'd guess Tori spelling.
Even in this relatively inconsequential thing, like who might play her in a movie, she doesn't feel enough control to be able to say someone she would enjoy taking the role. And then we get to the scene where Sidney's first attacked by Ghostface, and we essentially have the movie telling us that Sidney has no control over the movie that is her life. The scene starts off in the same way that Casey's does, where Sidney ends up getting a call from someone who ends up asking her about scary movies. And Sidney doesn't take this seriously at all.
Randy, you gave yourself away. Are you calling from work? Because Tatum's on her way over.
And of course she doesn't have all the information of Casey getting calls, so why would she be so worried? But throughout this scene, Sidney's making a point of how she doesn't like scary movies at all.
What's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
So after just having this conversation about how you should run out the front door, When Sidney's attacked, well, guess what? She's put the chain lock on her door, and as she's so stressed getting attacked by Ghostface, she's fumbling with the lock so much that she can't, so she has to run up the stairs. It's exactly the thing she just talked about hating in scary movies, and yet, because of the will of this movie, because of Ghostface, she is now forced into this situation for a movie she doesn't like. And then when we're at the party scene, we get a little while where Billy and Sidney are alone together, both being very apologetic as to how they have treated each other. In this scene, Sidney is arguing against the exact thing I'm trying to make a point of here.
But this is life. This isn't a movie.
Sure it is, Sid.
But Billy here is on my side and saying, no, it is one giant movie. It's all a big movie.
You can't pick your genre.
And Sidney goes along with this. Yeah, you know what? She doesn't get to pick her genre. If she did, she'd pick
Meg Ryan movie. Or even a good porno.
And here we're seeing Sidney trying to take control, trying to get to pick her genre, if you will. And it works to some extent in that moment, but she's not actually taking control of her life. As we see the very next time we see them, she hasn't actually changed the genre of her movie. Ghostface comes in behind and ends up stabbing Billy. But you know what? We've already talked about the fact that Billy's the killer, so what the hell is going on in this scene? Billy and Stu talk about how their entire plan will involve killing all these people, Sidney specifically, and then framing her father, who will also be dead. So how do we make sense of this scene here? Billy is faking his death in front of Sidney to get her trust, only to then kill her the same night? Plot-wise, this scene doesn't make any sense, but this isn't me about to give it like a CinemaSins ding or something like that, because honestly, this is so interesting to the other point I'm trying to make. This idea of life is like a movie and how much Billy and Stu commit to this idea. Billy and Stu are using Ghostface as a way to take control over their lives. Ghostface, in a sense, is kind of like a writer-director figure within the world of Scream. And if you are Ghostface, you get that power. So why does Billy fake his death? How does this make any sense? And it's entirely because of the presentation of it, the story of it. For him, this isn't about just killing these people. It's about making the movie. And the more interesting thing to do in a movie is to fake his death in this way, to have this fake out where he appears dead only to reveal himself to be the killer. This is a moment that's really cool in the movie of Scream, and it is created because he is trying to make the most interesting movie. And you know what? We gotta commend the man. Going this hard on something that, if his plan completely works, no one will ever know he did. Like, let's look at how Ghostface came to be. When we hear about Billy's motives, his origin, it all comes down to how his mother left his family because Sidney's mother slept with his father. Billy takes it upon himself to kill Maureen Prescott in order to get control of his life again. That's what Ghostface comes down to, the idea of taking back control. He's specifically targeting a person who ruined what he thought his life should be. And then if we look at Casey, a similar thing could be arguably said with Stu. Because what do we know about Casey a little bit into the movie?
Hey, Stu, didn't you used to date Casey?
Yeah, for like 2 seconds. Before she dumped you for Steve.
So of course, we now have to kill both of them. This is all about these two taking back control, and let's jump back to the way Billy was first introduced into the movie. He says the reason he came over to Sidney's place is because he was watching The Exorcist on TV and it was reminding him of their relationship.
It was edited for TV, you know, all the good stuff was cut out, and it got me thinking of us.
Again, he is putting everything in his worldview in terms of movies. We even get a little bit of Billy trying to direct Sidney. When Billy is released from jail and the two see each other at school, he's trying to tell her how she should feel about her mother's death.
I think it's time you got over that. I mean, when my mom left my dad, I accepted it. It's the way it is. She's not coming back.
He's trying to say she should just get over it, the way he got over his mother leaving. And ignoring the irony that comes up if you know the reveals in the movie, the fact that he didn't get over his mother leaving, that he killed Maureen Prescott to make up for his mother leaving. Like, this is him just trying to say, no, you have to behave this way. Because again, this is all his movie. This is the way he thinks she should take this information. When Billy and Stu give their whole explanation here, not just about motives, but about what the rest of their plan is, it's incredibly theatrical. They put the voice modulator into Neil Prescott's pocket and have all these plans to kill him and stab each other just so they look like they were in this attack and are the only survivors. But you know what? It's not enough to just be the survivors here. They have to plan the sequel.
Cause let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel!
Like I said, this idea of Ghostface as the writer or director, or both, Stu is already thinking about what has to happen next, what their next movie is going to be. So with this in mind, let's go back to that scene where Sidney and Billy are talking about movie genres.
You can't pick your genre.
Billy's line kind of has a different meaning here once we think about how Ghostface has put him in control of all this. He says, you can't pick your genre. Now, most of the time you take that as this kind of royal you, anyone, nobody could pick their genre. But here, I want to say maybe that's not what's going on. Maybe he's saying you, Sidney Prescott, cannot pick your genre because I have picked it for you. And all this takes us back to where we started. This idea of Sidney taking on the guise of Ghostface, where she uses the ammo of calling them to play a game.
Not so fast. We're gonna play a little game. It's called
Guess who just called the police and reported you? Sorry, motherfucking ass!
Where she puts on the costume only to end up stabbing Billy. And with everything we've talked about here, how life is like a movie, how Sidney didn't have control, and how Billy and Stu used Ghostface to take control, it all makes so much more sense here. Now, this isn't something I would read into the exact character motivations. I don't think there's a supernatural power connected to the Ghostface costume, and Sidney knows she has to put it on to take over her life. No, in this metaphorical sense, in the story we are being shown in this movie, the thing we could take away from it is this idea that Ghostface is the writer and director. And the idea that once Sidney puts that on, she is taking control of her life finally. And of course, ultimately ending it with Randy warning her that this is the part where the killer turns out to not actually be dead and gets one final scare. And it looks like he's about to attack. And then Sidney pulls the trigger, bullet through the forehead, and says,
Not in my movie.
now that she's worn the costume, now that she's taking control of her movie, it is hers, possibly for the first time since the death of her mother. This is still one of my all-time favorite horror movies, and it probably always will be. I love the whole idea of talking about genre in this kind of way and how this movie does it. It's in conversation with all the movies that came before it and using them as kind of a metaphor for taking your life back. Now, it goes about it in a terrible way that no one should do. Please don't dress up like Ghostface in order to get control over your life. But outside of that, who can't relate to this desire to want to write your own movie, to be able to be the protagonist in this kind of way and determine what genre you're going to be? I feel like I'm mixing metaphors between acting and writing, but that's kind of what this movie is doing in the way it's handling all this. So I think the thing I want to leave you with on this one is just the idea of, yeah, you know what? Life is a movie. Real life is far more boring than a movie and not plotted out in anywhere near as nice a way, but let's make it as nice a genre as we can for all of us. So please, please, do not become Ghostface yourself. It's a bad idea. Just don't do it. And that's it. I tried to do this video in a bit of a different way than I did the first one. It's much less heavily scripted because that is the biggest note I got back on the first one. I'm trying to just be more comfortable in front of a camera and just mess around a little bit more. I hope it came across well, but I want to hear what you guys think. Let me know, what kind of movie would you most want your life to be, and what are you doing this Halloween? So many things. Just talk to me. Let's have some fun in the comments. And until next time, see you later, guys.